This is a story about relationships. It's about how interconnections and interpersonal dynamics between evaluators and stakeholders, and among stakeholders, can affect the extent to which evaluation gets used. In the 1980s, Cousins pursued his doctoral studies at the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education in Toronto. He became very interested in the problem of enhancing the use of evaluation and worked with Professor Ken Leithwood. Cousins and Leithwood published a major review and integration of research on evaluation use in 1986. The study was the first of 3 in Cousins' doctoral dissertation. The conceptual framework that emerged from the analysis described processes of evaluation use and factors affecting or influencing use. 2 higher order factors, evaluation characteristics and decision or policy setting characteristics, were identified. But the conceptual framework was quite vague about connections between evaluation and user communities. In 1993, Cousins and Leithwood tested the framework in a school improvement, knowledge utilization research context. Emerging from their analysis of data on educational innovation and their parallel reading of school improvement literature was a 3rd higher order factor influencing use they called interactive processes. They discovered that linkages between knowledge production and knowledge use communities are complex and need to be examined more closely. Interpersonal interactions included knowledge producer and user exchanges as well as deliberations among members of the user community. On completion of the study, Cousins undertook to reread scholarship on evaluation utilization with the concept of interactive processes in mind. He revisited a chapter published by Michael Patton and colleagues in 1977 about the use of federal health evaluation. A significant insight arising from that study was the salience of the so-called personal factor. The authors were on to this construct at a very early stage. Subsequently, the personal factor has featured quite prominently in Patton's writings on utilization-focused evaluation, developmental evaluation, and principle-focused evaluation. In 2009, Patton served as a keynote speaker on day 1 of the 3-day Canadian Evaluation Society annual meeting held in Ottawa. His focus was on the critical importance of relationship building to realizing use. As usual, Patton's delivery was engaging and inspiring. His message was warmly received by the large audience. Only 1 month prior to the conference, the Canadian federal government, under the auspices of the Treasury Board Secretariat, had released a new version of their policy on evaluation. The policy was based on internal studies commissioned by Treasury Board, studies that looked into the information needs of senior federal decision makers and policymakers. Naturally, a plenary session on day 2 of the conference focused on the new policy. The panel of presenters included the head of Treasury Board's Center of Excellence for Evaluation, as well as evaluation heads from 4 federal departments. There were many new features in the policy, but salient among them was the concept of neutrality. It was explained that neutrality was preferred to independence since the latter was integral to the audit community. Yet emphasis on neutrality and impartiality was pervasive in the new document. The policy cautioned against relationship building between evaluators and stakeholders, including program managers. Cousins was struck by the contrasting perspectives offered by the 2 plenary sessions. He wondered whether members of the federal government panel had even attended the previous morning. There was little doubt that they uncritically embraced the concept of neutrality, whether pertaining to internal evaluators or those externally contracted to evaluate federal programs. On a practical level, Cousins and colleagues experienced the critical importance of relationships firsthand. In one project, they were asked to conduct an impact evaluation of the Canadian National Aboriginal Youth Suicide Prevention Strategy, or NAIPS. The strategy was up for renewal and a review was required. Initially, the federal department insisted that the evaluation ought to be based on a file review of the over 80 projects being implemented in Indigenous communities across the country. Cousins resisted this request, arguing that it would not adequately represent the perspectives of recipient communities, particularly with regard to the effects of the funding. Ultimately, a compromise was reached and 2 parallel evaluation initiatives and reports were delivered. The first was based on an extensive file review, and it satisfied the client's initial demand. The second was a multiple case study of 4 Indigenous communities, which had received NAIPS funding. The communities were selected because, reputedly, desirable benefits were accruing as a consequence of the funding. The sampling strategy was inspired by the most significant change technique. Each of the case studies was, in fact, a participatory evaluation involving a trained evaluator with rapport in the local community, working in tandem with community members to evaluate the local application of NAIPS support. The cross-case analysis, which was collaboratively produced by team members from each community, was the report submitted to the federal department along with the file review report. It would not be a stretch to say that the cross-case report provided much richer insights about the effects of NAIPS than did the file review. This was made possible by the solid working relationships between Cousins and the community teams and inter-team collegial relations. In another project, Cousins was invited to lead a nationwide evaluation of secondary teacher in-service practice in India. The challenge was daunting, but Cousins already had significant connections in India arising from multi-year evaluation capacity building projects. Many of those who'd been trained were available for this project. Ultimately, it was collectively decided to focus on 9 states across India that were diverse in socioeconomic and geographic character. From each of the 9 states, about 6 educators with responsibility for in-service education were recruited to be part of the evaluation team. In each state, about 10 or so focus groups were carried out with groups of various system actors, and a sample of 1,000 or so teachers responded to a questionnaire survey. The complexity of this challenge was substantial given the sheer numbers of implicated actors, the wide geographic dispersion, and the volume of data collected. 2 factors contributed significantly to the project's success. First, the evaluation was extremely well resourced through a combination of domestic and international aid funds. Consequently, centralized large group meetings could be held at planning, instrument development, data analysis, and reporting phases. Second, the team included several members who'd undergone ECB training led by Cousins. They were eager to work on the project. Despite the challenges, through substantial cooperation and commitment, the team of nearly 60 persons managed to complete the inquiry and produced a 3-volume report within the required timeline of about 1.5 years. Solid relationships were essential. On the research front, Cousins and Associates had produced Principles to Guide Practice in Collaborative Approaches to Evaluation, or CAE, based on data collected from 320 practicing evaluators. Respondents rated and commented on a project they considered successful and another they thought was much less successful than hoped. No definition of success was supplied. The choice was theirs. After having developed and validated the principles, the research team wanted to drill deeper into the data to learn about how evaluators define success in CAE. The research team looked at qualitative data to determine just how participants define success. Through an inductive coding exercise, a range of dimensions emerged. These were associated with the nature of collaboration, antecedent conditions affecting it, and consequences of it. The results revealed that many practicing evaluators tend to frame success in terms of stakeholder interrelations and evaluator-stakeholder relations. While the consequences of evaluations were certainly integral to how success was characterized, we can see that good quality relationships among stakeholders and between evaluators and stakeholders was essential. Relationships are not made in heaven, but when enhanced use is the objective, significant evaluator attention to nurturing and cultivating good quality working relations is essential. Such is not limited to collaborative approaches, but implicates any evaluation that seeks to leverage change or otherwise make a difference. And there you have it. Thank you for listening.